this video we are going to be talking about what is a scale. Alright, well, we kind of actually already talked about a little bit of a scale in a previous video when we were talking about the octave. Okay, so we talked about the octave as this, we have this one note, we double the frequency, and we have this higher note. Alright, so we have these two notes, and then we take this octave and we divide it. And we talked about how we already divide the octave into 12 half steps, creating the chromatic scale. So anybody can play the chromatic scale. If you have a piano, you don't need a lot of piano skill. You just go to the piano and you pretty much play every single note going up or every single note going down. So here's your chromatic scale. Alright, and I could sort of keep going throughout the entire piano. So that's a chromatic scale, and you can hear all the half steps of the octave that we have. Okay, now, and of course you see how the octave is, it's kind of just keeps repeating over and over again. Now, we don't always play the chromatic scale, alright, so this is not the only scale, it's certainly not the most popular scale, alright, so it's a great scale, don't get me wrong. But usually the scales that we play are known as diatonic scales. Alright, these diatonic scales consist of 5 whole steps and 2 half steps. Alright, the most common commonly used diatonic scales, or one that we're going to be talking about initially, is the major scales. Okay, and there's tons of scales out there. Alright, but we'll start with the major scales since they're very popular. They're used quite often. They're a great way to kind of get into scales, and then from there we will branch out. So let's explore major scales.
So in addition to being popular, these major scales also form the basis of our system of tonality. So when we have a melody and we see all these notes kind of just going together and it kind of just sounds pretty good, and we wonder, well, how do these notes go together and how do these notes kind of sound coherent, and why do they match so well? Well, it's not a coincidence. So this goes back to scales, and mostly major scales. I mean, there are also minor scales, but I would say major scales are a little bit more of a basis of tonality than minor scales. Although we do use, like I said before, we do use many different types of scales. Okay, so we're starting with this major scale. All right, so let's say we want to create a major scale or figure out a major scale. Well, all you need to do is memorize this formula. Okay, if you memorize this formula and you use this formula, you can figure out any major scale. So the formula is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Again, that's whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So really make sure that you memorize this formula. So you can build a major scale off of any pitch, off of any note. And then from that note, as long as you use this formula, you will have yourself a major scale. Okay, so why don't we create one? So we're going to create a major scale on C. All right, so there's my C. Okay, here's an octave above C, so this is from C to C. So we're going to take this octave and we're going to create a major scale from it. All right, so first we start, remember the formula, so here's the whole step, okay, from C to D. By the way, I know it's a whole step because there's a black note in between those two white notes. So that's how I know that that is in fact a whole step. Another way to think of it is that a whole step is made up of 2 half steps. A half step to C sharp, and then another half step from C sharp to D. Okay, so that is a whole step from C to D. Then we have another whole step from D to E. We know that this is a half step because between E and F there is no black note. So E to F is a half step. Okay, let's keep going. F to G is a whole step. We need another whole step. G to A, and now A to B is a whole step. And finally, we need a half step from B to C. There you go. All right, so here is my major scale. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And because it is based on C, this would be a C major scale. Now many students really like this scale because there's no black notes. As you can see, I'm using all the white notes. It makes it very easy to play. For some reason we associate black notes with complication or difficulty. But as long as you have this formula, there's really nothing difficult about it. You just kind of just make sure that you have whole steps and half steps in the correct place, and you should be just fine. So why don't we take a look at the C scale on the staff? So we looked at the C scale on the piano. Here it is on the staff. So we start with C. From C to D is a whole step. We need another whole step from D to E. E to F is a half step. F to G is a whole step. G to A is a whole step. Another whole step with A to B. And what's the last one? Remember, it's a half step. No problem. From B to C is a half step. Okay, so this is the C scale as it looks like on the treble clef staff. Make sure that you have your clefs correct. Okay, but what if we want to do a G scale? Okay, so we're going to now create a major scale based on G. All right, so we remember our formula. It's going to be exactly the same. The formula doesn't change. The notes will change, but the formula does not. The whole steps and half steps are still in the same place. So G to A is a whole step. A to B is a whole step. B to C is a half step. C to D is a whole step. D to E is a whole step. E to F, is that a whole step? Wait a second. E to F, we need a whole step. But take a look at E and F. E and F is not a whole step. There's no black note in between them. So we know that E and F is actually a half step. So that's not going to work. We can't have F because it won't fit with the formula. This would not be a G major scale. Okay, so what can we do? Well, we know that E to F is a half step. And we know that a whole step is made up of two half steps, so we just need to move a half step apart. And there you go. E to F sharp is a whole step. Okay, so now I can complete my G major scale. E to F sharp is a whole step. And check it out. F sharp to G is a half step. So that's how I know that these are the correct notes for a G major scale.
So when you're writing your scales, or if you find yourself having to write a scale, here is a very helpful hint. So whatever note you decide that you're going to write a scale on, so let's say we're going to base a scale on this note, make sure that all the notes that come after it are on lines and spaces. Remember, scales are a series of half steps and whole steps, but that still makes them steps. All right, so they should be moving stepwise, which is line, space, line, space. All right, now it's time for our quick check. So what I want you to do is, for our quick check, might be a little bit longer than our usual quick checks, but I want you to create a scale based on this note. So if you take a look at that note, I want you to create a scale based on that note. Pause the video and go for it. Okay, did you get it? All right. Even if you got close, it's still a big task, and I think even if you got pretty close, you did pretty well. All right. So first things first, you got to figure out what is that note. All right. So you got to figure out. All right. So good boys, remember your clef. Good boys do. This is a D. So I know that this note starts on D. Then the next thing I need to remember is my formula. Okay. So I know that this is going to be a series of half steps and whole steps, and we just said that one of our shortcuts is that these notes are going to be moving by step. So I can just go ahead and fill in my scale, my lines and spaces, all the way up to the next D. Good boys do fine always. Move by stem. Alright, so this is going to get its own line, so that's a C, which would make this a D. So this is the beginning of my D scale. Now remember, just because I put in these notes doesn't mean that I'm done. I still have to put in my sharps and flats. In order to figure out what gets sharped or what gets altered, I just go to my formula for a major scale. So remember, it's whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. All right, so I use that to figure out what note gets altered. All right, and if you need a keyboard to make sure where the half steps and whole steps are, by all means you can use a keyboard. You can use a printout of the keyboard to figure out where the half steps are. So we have D, E. E to F is a half step, so I have to alter that. F sharp, G, A, B, ah. From B to C is a half step. I need to make that a whole step, so I'm going to alter it to make that C sharp. Now B to C sharp is a whole step, and C sharp to D is a half step. All right, always check your work to make sure it's correct, but hopefully some of the helpful hints will also help you get here faster. Okay? Had trouble with the quick check? This was a hard one, all right? So you might need to do this maybe a couple times, double check it, all right, to make sure everything is correct, and practice on other scales, all right? Don't worry, you'll get it.